problem is ride sharing for the elderly. And the company is Vimeo, you said?
Uber, Lyft, or any...
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Sorry, it was Vimeo who, like, gave me this prompt when I was applying.
Oh, okay. I'll just say Uber, Lyft, or whoever. So, they give you the prompt, but it's like the company is like Uber, Lyft, or whatever ride sharing. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Is it cool if I go with Lyft?
Yeah.
Just as
whichever works.
Okay.
They're pretty much the same.
Okay. And can I get some more context around why specifically there's a problem with ride sharing for the elderly?
Yeah. So, like I said in the beginning, they just feel like there's an opportunity here where they could expand their users, right? So right now it's a lot of just like people who are tech savvy, people who need to get from point A to point B on a regular basis, such as people who work in the city. So these are like their common users, right? But they want to expand into a little bit more niche areas. And so they figured, okay, well, the elderly still need to get from point A to point B, but we don't see a lot of elderly users. So how can we do that? So that's the context of what what the CEO is thinking right now.
Okay.
And you're the designer hired to figure out how we can penetrate this market.
Oh, yeah. I love this phrase. It's almost like a tech meme. Penetrate the market. It's like everywhere. So from my understanding, it seems like this is just maybe a new venture for the company to go to focus more on like maybe a missed target audience or a missed user base that could be one of the target audiences. So my understanding also is that this is just something to add on to the current design of the product, right? So it's not necessarily like going to branch out to like a separate app or anything like that. It's just going to be, if this was developed, it's going to be like an add-on feature for what exists.
I would say that's up to you in terms of whether it's an add-on or a brand new app, whichever you think will be a better solution.
Okay.
Well, other than that, you got it right on point. You understand the context.
Okay. Is there anything else I missed before I move on, especially with the user or something?
Nope.
Okay. So the users that you mentioned we're solving for is just the elderly, like the broad elderly, right? No specific geographic location or demographic of elderly, right?
No specifics.
Okay. So since you mentioned it's the elderly, I'm going to break them down into 3 groups of elderly that may be maybe like 3 different categories, and we can like break it down from there and see where like potential avenues we could explore. So actually, before I move on, is there any particular area that's highly profitable for the company? Like, for example, like city areas or like any geographic specific locations?
Yeah, so we noticed that the highest use of our users are in cities.
Okay. Great. And ages are just essentially 55 and up, right?
Hello?
Yeah, hey, you still there?
Sorry, 1 second. Okay, can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Alright, sorry about that. Wait, Chrome just restarted. What the heck?
Oh, good.
Wait, I can't see anything on the... Let me restart. I'm gonna come back.
Okay, I can also restart too if there's issues.
Okay, cool. Everything's back to normal.
Okay.
So the question you asked was, is there an area that's more profitable? So I would say cities are more profitable currently, but if there is a strategy that can target outside of cities, we are open to I'm not actually trying to push you in one direction. I'm just keeping it open for you to work through and decide what you think is the best.
And in terms of age, I'm just gonna assume for this challenge, I'm gonna assume it's 55 and above. Is that all right? Like someone who is around the age of retirement or whatnot. Okay.
Totally.
Okay, great. So I'm going to divide them into 3 categories. First one is fully capable elderly who are probably working, but they don't need like anyone's help. So essentially, the day-to-day they're like fully autonomous. And the second category is someone who's maybe partially autonomous, so maybe they have a language barrier or they have some kind of disability that sometimes requires people to help them out, but they are still able to do most of the work for themselves. So for example, walking somewhere or being able to go to the grocery store, like for the simple pickup. So I'm going to categorize them as partially autonomous, but need help in some situations. And lastly, this category of elderly are those who need help for basically every situation, so they may have a live-in nurse or a personal maid. And I'm going to break down the needs of each one of these, or the pain points of each one of these user groups, and you can see where it goes from there. Does that look good so far?
Yeah, this is going well.
Okay. So the first one of the pain points they may have is that for them, they might not be just tech savvy, so they're a little bit intimidated by technology. It's not that they're not capable, it's just that they may feel intimidated because it's been a while since they use like the latest devices. But again, it might just be a slower learning curve. They might be used to doing things like the old-fashioned way. So for example, when they order a service, they may fully expect a person to show up, shake their hand, talk, not so much as having something could be completely automated by technology. Another pain point that this target user may have is that even though they may know where they're going and they know that that they may know how to order everything and they may know how to like get there and even like perhaps drive them themselves. However, they just don't trust a service like this because perhaps they've been victims of like scams or fraud and they're just very wary of trying new things. So they're just especially cautious of new companies, and they just really need like some kind of validation or proof for them to really trust any kind of new platform they're introduced to. I think this looks good so far. What do you think? Is it alright if I move on to, oops. Does this look good so far? Because if so, I can move on to the next user group.
Yeah, this looks good so far.
Okay. Leave a little text box for freedom. So those are partially autonomous and need help in some situations. They, again, are probably intimidated by tech, or specifically new tech. They also probably have a slower learning curve, Perhaps they are not assimilated to the culture, so they maybe sometimes have a language barrier, as they may be someone's parents are immigrants, or they may have a minor disability. For example, hard to see eyes, and the phone is like so small, the screen is hard for them to read exactly what is going on. So they may have some kind of minor ability that impairs them in ordering the service. So for this group, since the majority of the functions they can carry out day to day, like again I stated before, walking through their usual grocery store, or maybe doing like very usual tasks like maybe take out the trash or dishes, they're usually okay. But for them, it's really more that they have a hard time also maybe like asking for help in situations because they're kind of embarrassed, so they don't want to ask for help because they're usually autonomous in other areas, and then when something like this is a problem, they try not to bother people because they're still at the stage where they don't want to ask for help if they can. So there's some feelings of embarrassment, perhaps, that as you get older, that you need more help from other people, even though you yourself may not feel that way, may be resistant to the change. So yeah, this group, I think I talked pretty in. Yeah, I covered four points or 5 points. So I can move on to the next group as well.
Yep.
The last group. So this group, I would say, is definitely has a lot of similarity with the past two. Oops. But really, with the last one, maybe more similarities than the first one. They have a major disability that they really need someone to help them order a service. So this is everything from loading to unloading from the car, even opening doors. They since they are fully reliant on someone else for help, it's really up to the person who is there to help them if they understand the technology and if they have experience with it. So they're reliant on the helper to be able to understand these services.
Mm-hmm.
So because of this, when they have any kind of new service that maybe offer that may be beneficial, there's kind of a gatekeeper in a sense. And you have to bypass, essentially, the gatekeeper is like the stakeholder. You have to bypass to get to them. So there's like a third party involved for all the actions. So yeah, so with these 3 user groups that have been identified, is there anything that I haven't gone over that you would like to emphasize, or I can go ahead and proceed to the next step?
Let's just take a quick second and talk about this gatekeeper idea.
Mm-hmm.
How would you describe this person who is helping these individuals?
Yeah, I would
because
say...
in a sense, right, if you
Mm-hmm.
design for the third group, you also have to design for the gatekeeper, just like you said. So it might be worth it to explore them just briefly.
Yeah. So this person may be a live-in maid, or a nurse, or a family member. So depending on the income level, sometimes, of the elderly, it could be either one of these variations. And I think this gatekeeper tends to be someone who, maybe because they're around the elderly often, um, they're not exactly keeping up with the latest technology, because their main concern is to, on day to day, like probably manage like physical help of people they're in touch with. So, for example, if they're working with the elderly like 10 hours a day, most of the time that they're using during the day is actually in contact with another human being. So they're not like on a computer, or like sitting around reading the news, or having some kind of technological device in front of them. So I think this group itself is probably most likely not like the first person to hear about the newest tech. So not exactly that they're intimidated, but like new services take longer to reach them.
Sure. So how would you describe their what we like to call digital literacy? Like how like you're describing that it takes a while for them to learn that there's something new. But using technology, do you think they have large difficulties, moderate difficulties, or no difficulties?
Yeah, I think that depends on the person who is helping them. So, for example, if they were someone who is a boomer, we can assume they probably will have, or majority of them may have slow learning curve towards technology. But if it's someone young, like for example, their daughter or their son who's like in their 30s, who's a professional, and then they work during the day, and then maybe at mid afternoon they come home to take care of their family or take care of their parents. In that case, then they would actually be pretty receptive to new technology. But I would say like probably the majority of the situation is probably not like a child or like their parent, their daughter or son, just because it's really hard to take care of a senior full time and also work a full time job. So that's probably like more of outlier cases.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. Like literacy varies. Yeah. So just after exploring these three user groups, is there any one that you're particularly interested in that I can dive deeper into, or would you like me to go ahead and select which ones I think is um, the most logical next step for this exercise?
Yeah, why don't you decide what the next logical step is, and I'd love to hear what you're thinking while you're doing that.
Okay. I think just by what we're seeing right here, because the third group is heavily reliant on help, and I think that itself is almost a completely different service that we're offering to them compared to the first two groups. I think if we were to tackle the first two groups, then we would tackle more users. So because of that, I'm proposing for us to go with the first two, the fully autonomous and the partially autonomous. As if you solve problems for the partially autonomous, it's essentially like killing two birds with a stone, which you could also solve problems with the fully autonomous. But with the one that's reliant on help, that's a pretty exclusive group to solve for.
Okay, so your argument is solving for the first two uh, covers more users. The latter two, or more so just the latter one, uh, you're saying is kind of outside of our space.
No, I'm saying that if we were to solve for the one that rely on help, this would essentially be a new service that
Yep.
is probably not applicable to these first two. So we could solve this one, but that would be essentially like a separate app or a completely different product from these two. But if we were to solve for these two, things that are applying for partially autonomous could also apply for the fully autonomous group.
Okay, cool.
Okay, then I'll go ahead and solve for the first and the second. So I'm going to break down a bit into perhaps their maybe where they live, or let me actually think about this one for a sec. Yeah, I'm going to break these down by geographical locations because you did also mention that the highest use was in cities, and that they were open, that you were open to other areas, but I would love to explore that. So the first group of people that I'm going to explore are the elderly who are fully autonomous and partially autonomous who live in cities, the ones that live in suburbs, and then the ones that live in rural areas. How does that sound for you?
Sounds fine.
Okay. So for addressing each of these groups, I'm going to like go over some of the pain points of maybe ordering a service that is relating to elderly who are fully autonomous and partially autonomous. So maybe one of the pain points that they're not ordering a ride-sharing service is because they are more familiar with transportation, like public transportation. However, they may dislike how much time it is taking right now to get from somewhere. So they dislike the waiting time. In general, maybe just unreliability of public transportation. Actually, looking at this now, do you think separating these three into groups of drivers exclusively and people who are partial, as in sometimes they drive, sometimes they take public transportation, and then public transportation, I think that might be a better approach. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because I think that actually may be better in terms of narrowing down the users that we want to solve for.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I did tilt my head a little bit with the city, suburbs, and rural, just because I think it's okay to make the assumption that suburbs and rural areas, no matter what we come up with, it's just not going to make a huge impact on the user base.
Okay. Car drivers. Yeah, so we could tackle each of the pain points again. So going back to the public transportation group, perhaps they dislike the waiting time for this specific service, as public transportation is generally unreliable at times, and if there's any, for example, inclement weather, you're basically bounded in-house. Another thing is that they may feel unsafe because, as an elderly, when you're riding in public transportation, there's a higher risk of being perhaps getting something stolen or even something else happening, like being harassed. And for the elderly, sometimes if they're trying to navigate to a new place, it may be difficult for them to figure out how the routes happen. So there is a higher learning curve of navigating to new areas, as you need to learn completely different routes. And in general, I would say maybe it's also inconvenient because at times if you, in most buses they take cash, so at times if you have like, maybe you forgot your wallet at home, you can't actually leave, or actually ride on the bus, you have to leave and go back. So there's a huge inconvenience around paying for the actual ticket itself, like it's not portable. So the elderly has something that they have to remember every time they leave the house. They have to make sure that they have the right amount of change and all that good stuff. So inconvenience around paying for the service. Yeah, so I'm going to move on to the hybrid model. So these are people who sometimes drive and sometimes ride the bus. I would say they probably have the same pain points as the they have really similar pain points to that of the public transportation group. So let's see. You probably dislike how unreliable general transportation can be. At times they probably feel unsafe. However, because they do have access to a car, they are not as heavily influenced by the weather. And they don't have as much difficulty navigating to new areas as they do have an option to drive. But I will say they may have problems like maintaining their car, so if anything happens with their vehicle, they're probably bounded to ride public transportation. So car maintenance is an issue, perhaps at an age where it's really hard to like stoop down and change the wheels or change the gas, or change the oil as well. Let's do it again. So in this situation, they may also be sharing this car with someone, so they may not be full-time car owners since they're hybrid. So sometimes there may be disagreements with family members or whoever they're sharing the car with on when the car should be used. So in terms of how they travel, it's really depending on perhaps the schedule of the car that's available and also depending on the schedule of the public transportation. So it's not as flexible for them to travel. So it's the same thing as the first one as well. First one is very inflexible. And moving on to the last one, with car drivers who basically maybe live in an area that they have no public transportation, or maybe this group has no desire for public transportation, they just fully drive, I would say that they definitely have car maintenance issues because, again, if it's something significant and they either do not like asking for help or maybe that it's just really uncomfortable for them to change any aspects in the car, like again, mentioning the oil change or like the gas change, it can severely handicap their day. Another aspect of this is that perhaps for them, having a car, like fully having a car is kind of almost at this point a liability. Like it's not the most efficient, it's not like the most efficient way for them to get around. Like maybe they only go out the house, like for example, once a week or even once a month. So for them, having a car is, having those payments or like paying insurance or like maintaining a car is a little bit too costly for what they need.
Okay.
And I would also say that sometimes for this specific group, they may have like in cities and places that don't really have convenient parking, it may stress them out to be driving in those areas. So it's really stressful to drive in heavily congested areas as everyone's moving so fast and things are happening a lot at once. So it's pretty, it can be pretty dangerous for them as well because of the fact that oftentimes there needs to be like fast reaction times for like certain events. And especially in a city when a lot of things are happening with bicyclers and things like that, for them it just may not be a mode of transportation they want to use. So I would say that this is also a pain point for the hybrid one as well.
Okay.
I'm saying this is flexible as it's pretty flexible in terms of how they get around, but it's just maybe not the most efficient or what's the word? Money. What is the word where it's like efficient for your money? Like
financially responsible.
Yeah. Financially.
Yeah.
Sound. Maybe not financially sound. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. I actually think this is we've done a good amount of exploring here. I just want to be conscious of time. We have 16 minutes, but I think I dipped for like 2, so like 18 minutes.
Yeah.
So I have a guiding question right now, which is, out of these 3 user groups, the public transportation, hybrid, and car drivers, I think it's a good idea for us to start considering the value proposition that converting to ride sharing would provide.
Mm-hmm.
So really, like in layman terms, who would gain the most out of switching to, relying on car sharing? Like, who do we impact the most? And what is that value proposition that we're giving them?
I think we impact the most are seniors who are elderly who want to get around and they are just dissatisfied with the public transportation because of the fact that they right now have no other options of going to any place except through what the public transportation service can offer, and sometimes they may have to walk like very far distances to get it somewhere, especially if there's no route there. Ride sharing would essentially allow them to go anywhere, and I think for this group especially, they're probably the most. This is probably the most painful problem for them out of the other two, since the other two have an option of using cars.
Mm.
So because of that, I think we should go and solve for the user group of people who live in people who use public transportation who are elderly that are fully autonomous or partially autonomous.
Okay, cool.
Does that answer your question?
Yes. So, how would you describe in a sentence the problem we're trying to solve? Like, what is the primary problem that we can base the rest of our exercise on?
I think the primary problem is that elderly who have no other option than public transportation, or let me rephrase this, elderly who are heavily reliant or when you mean like phrasing it in a problem, do you mean just kind of if we were to design a product for them right now, like how would that mission statement look like?
Yeah, kind of like the people problem.
Yeah.
Because we've definitely done a lot of exploring now, and there's a lot of information floating around. So I'm trying to see how we can, package this.
Yeah. So if we were to package this as a product, let's just pretend like it's a standalone product. We could say something like, giving elderly access to ride sharing, giving elderly who have what's the best way to word this? Giving elderly access to means to ride sharing. This is a tough one. It's like giving elderly means to ride sharing or giving elderly means to accessing a vehicle. It could be one of the two.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the end of the day, so this is what I'm kind of thinking about. So at the end of the day, the problem is still the elderly, just like everybody else, needs to get from point A to point B.
Right.
Right. We've decided that we want to focus on those who are fully autonomous or partially autonomous. So we can assume that for the most part, they can operate an app, though it may be difficult to learn how to do so. Right. Finally, we've talked about public transportation. So we're targeting those users who are struggling with like the things they don't like about public transportation. Well, actually, let me step back and say the first thing we probably need to do is, again, the value prop. Like, how do we convince these users that, hey, you're used to this public transportation, we get that, but we have a better solution for you if you were to use ride sharing. With ride sharing, wait times are transparent. ISS dislikes wait time. Unreliability of public transportation, there's a lot of transparency in the ride-sharing app. You know when the driver's going to come. You know when a driver has accepted your ride request. Unsafe at times, safety. So it's like you've listed out a lot of the issues that these users face that they might not like about public transportation. So if we are able to kind of latch on to those things and be like, hey, these are some really crappy experiences you have with public transportation. You should try us. What is that thing that we are trying to address?
How about providing elderly a safe and reliable way to get around? Or providing elderly a trustworthy, trustworthy drivers.
Okay.
So it could be people focused, or it could be like actual route focused.
Yep. I like this. So there are some keywords that's standing out for me right now. get access, meaning make it easy for the person to actually use this thing. Or you can even think of get access as in a much more contextual thing. Let's say, for example, I don't want to give you too many ideas, but let's say they're used to waiting for the subway. They all of a sudden hear that all of the trains have broken down, and we are not able to get another train here for another hour. Perhaps at that moment, the app could realize, hey, you're a public transport user. Let me just send you a car, right? That's just one idea. But so that's getting access, right? How do we get them into our cars? Now, the other two themes that I see here that are really big is safe/trustworthy and reliability. So I think those are three areas that we can tackle. Let's choose one of them. So access, safety, and reliability.
Access, safety.
Of those three, which one do you think we should pursue?
I think because they're elderly, they have, for them, safety is a larger issue. I think for this one, I would go with safety. So perhaps like safe rides on demand for the elderly or something like that.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay.
Also, just time check, there's 10 more minutes.
Okay. So I can go ahead and brainstorm some of the potential features that we may need for a product like this, because it sounds like this may be a standalone product, but at least like for the MVP, what kind of features we need to develop and launch this into the marketplace.
Cool.
So with the idea of safe rides on demand, I think the first thing is that we need to have very thorough background checks for the drivers. Or provide like some kind of system where we could have thorough checks of the drivers and then be able to show like proof of the fact that this driver has a good record. So driver identification/validation. I think for sure that because there is an aspect to safety and perhaps maybe someone's not convinced that after they see this driver has a good record, like how do we know that this driver is still reliable for me? So maybe a part where they can include testimonials from other customers who have taken this driver. So like the focus is on having the previous riders that are perhaps like the elderly user who's looking to book the ride right now, once they see that there are other people who use this driver and it has a good experience, again, because they're more of the old-fashioned traditional, like word-of-mouth kind of days, they may hold more value for that than any other signals of trustworthiness. So the whole idea is like a good word of mouth from someone is sells more than anything you could ever tell to a customer. And then another feature we could have is that we will show exactly what route the driver will be taking, so they know that when they're being picked up, there's a very little chance or almost no chance that this driver, when they go off route, is going to be able to like drive into maybe an unsafe location. So we're gonna show them routes being taken, but then also have an on-demand call. So, for example, if they feel like they're being threatened or unsafe, or the driver is going off route, they can have an option for us to reach them, or almost like immediately. So, for example, if they felt unsafe at any time during the trip, they can have like a chat agent and like be able to report that right away. And let me just take a moment and look over the other context I've written and just make sure I've covered all my ground. And I think because they're, again, the old-fashioned, well, a lot of them we could assume are kind of used to like the traditional way of doing things, when people um, are able to like have a human contact before they try these services. I think it's especially important that we have, at least for this product, that we are able to accommodate users throughout the service. So it's not so much like how many people we can get in, but like how many users can trust us and will be able to spread like by word of mouth. So we should be able to have an agent or someone that they could reach at all times that they could ask questions to. So the service will be launched with a call center, or yeah, a call center. And even for maybe the first touch point, like for example, if we were to hand, oh, 1 second. So for example, if they were told by this by a friend, and even like maybe our business card, or even on the website, the first point of contact is that they may want to like request a call. So we're gonna have that introduction instead of it being like the App Store. The introduction will be the actual call with a real agent.
Here's a challenge. Sorry to do this with only 5 minutes left, but with because it feels like you're leaning on pretty heavily on having a call center, some agent ready to help right away.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking more about the user experience in the moment. If the elderly are already in the car and they need to call an agent,
Mm-hmm.
can you imagine how that might be a difficult situation? For example, the driver can probably hear everything you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, do you think it's actually stronger? So I see two things, right? I see a lot of like preemptive confirmation, driver identification, validation, testimonies, and then I see your second area, which is like in the moment, ready agents and call centers. So let's pick one of those two rather than having both of them right now.
Okay.
What do you think we should do?
I think actually, for a service like this, it should be built out with having someone be able to talk and explain the service. So the reason I'm saying this is because even if we were to theoretically have a really great route tracking and be able to have agents on call, that still may not be incentivizing enough for this particular user group to try a service like this, because you still have to get them into a vehicle of a stranger. And no matter how much you try to prove, or like on the way, if they're not even going to download or even open an account and book their first trip, it really doesn't matter. So I think for an MVP feature, I think having a maybe even a caller that's able to having a call center of people who are able to kind of like explain the service, almost kind of like sales call, where people are able to kind of go over how everything will work and like in detail of what's going to happen and like what services we provide. Maybe that will become more for like an affluent, at first maybe an affluent user group. So I'm thinking towards that group is that we'll have these services in check, and then maybe for the actual app itself, it's going to be like very basic, where you just book the driver and you tell them where you want to go, or you tell the call center where you want to be taken. And this call center will direct the driver to come pick you up. So the actual elderly do not handle, the part of like tracking the route themselves. They're just expected, they just know that they call someone who's trustworthy, and they're going to send a trustworthy driver, and it's going to pick them up and drop them off at this location that they wanted.
Got it. Okay.
So I guess in terms of building a platform for this, it doesn't necessarily need to be even now like an app. So would you like me to go ahead and design something that is maybe similar to like a website? Maybe that's better instead, because I feel like most of this work is actually going to happen with the call center themselves.
Sure, let's do that.
Okay. So let's just say the user has seen, has heard of this by word of mouth. Like one of their friends told them, hey, by the way, there's like this cool service that, they validate all the drivers and they come and pick you up. So let's just say that they've already gone through that screen of explaining, and now they're looking to request a call. And I think a very straightforward and simple format, at least for the MVP, is to request a call. Oops. So, and then perhaps by this time that we can assume this driver already has signed up for an account. So let's just say that they already have like a certain code they dial in for like personal identification numbers. So they dial in, let's say 839 for your ID. Then now when the caller picks up, they know exactly which customer this is for. So they go straight into the operator. And then here we just actually include instructions of just very straightforward of what information the caller needs in order for us to book a ride. So maybe please have your address ready or something, like your full address ready, or for current location as well as destination. So these could be just like directions that we provide. We ask them to provide for operators. And then we have perhaps once we have something like this that's pretty straightforward, we can actually move on to another screen, which is the help screen, or my account screen. So let me put on, so this could be like a very MVP my account and maybe help for anything inquiries that they may have. So in this my account, we can show how much they were billed for each trip. So very straightforward. This is a trip you took from here and here. This is how much it cost. And I think for an MVP, this would suffice for our first launch to test out the service, because essentially they are being treated the way that they want to be treated as customers. So they have that human contact. They have someone who is able to tell them, we're having this person pick you up along this place, and then if they ever need to reach them during the call, they can call this number again. But also throughout their account, they can have trips that have already been taken and see what they've been charged in total, so they then know that the service that we're offering is completely transparent and we won't ever charge them anything that's maybe over excessive. So everything is shown to them to kind of provide that trust, and also them having an operator they can speak to, I think makes them feel at ease.